When Ali called and was explaining all this to me, and that I was remembering a time when, well, in fact, I think Tom and Juanita were here at the house, and at that particular time, my wife and I were doing the evening portion of the 11th step. We had just been doing it, and what we had done is we'd just taken an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, and that was just big enough where we could put down each of the items here and have about an inch on the page, maybe make notes on it and do something like that. And so that's what Julie and I are doing. So we go through it and ask each other as we went along, was I resentful? And we were pretty honest about that because we know each other really well. We've only been doing this for, I don't know, a hell of a long time. So it's just kind of been that way. And I remember the day that Tom and Juanita were spending the night here, and we did that thing together, the four of us. We found that very useful. And so I guess I still feel that way about this. Was I resentful? Was I selfish? Yeah, probably. I probably said that 9 times out of 10 or more. Was I dishonest? I don't think so. And I'd go through like that in those brief manners each time. Do I owe an apology? Most of the time I can get along and not have to do that. If I do have to do that, it's very often with my wife. And that's what too bad. Excuse me. Can't turn all the phones off no matter how hard I try. I'm sorry about that. And have I kept something to myself, which I should share with another person at once? So what happened with all of that? Just talk about it. Years ago, Don and I, and I see a picture of Bob O here too that Tim Miller's posted. And we kind of started doing this thing where we would backing up a step, the 10th step buddies, and we would go through that and call each other if we had something to share. But we've always asked ourselves if these things to do. So was I resentful? I don't do resentment very much anymore. I generally just, it shows up and I'll get a hot spell going on and it gets discarded quickly. Or I call somebody like Tom or Tim or Bob or somebody, other people, and take care of that in a hurry. It doesn't hang with me that much. Dishonesty. Have to look harder at that every day if I'm reviewing this at night. So anyway, that's kind of the way I go on. So was I resentful? And we write down the resentments we had within that inch on the paper we had. And selfish, we'd talk about the occasions during the day where we're being selfish. Fortunately, the older I get, the less I do that, and probably because I'm getting so damn old, I don't really care much about a lot of stuff, but what that be about? Dishonesty, or afraid, that I don't do much fear anymore in the morning or in the afternoon, and I don't do that. So anyway, we would go through that list, and we made it a regular thing we did every night. Now, I wish Julie and I had been doing that since, but we really haven't been lately. She suffers from a disease that keeps continuing to get worse, and so we try to have our time together where we're quiet and we hold hands and talk, and we'll share some things that go on working at. But if we didn't have the availability of this paragraph, we'd be up the creek still, as I see it, to do that. That's the way to be. So I love the one here where it says, have we kept something to ourselves that should be discussed with another person at once? And like I said earlier, I don't do that as much anymore. I can't stand the heat with that stuff. I'm sitting on something with that. It's going to be pretty quick, I got several 10-step buddies right here in Indianapolis that we all do that on occasion. You get called. You see them showing up on the caller ID, you better answer it because they ain't calling just for nothing. They got something they really want to discuss and get it taken care of with that. So as long as we're in this area, I think 10th and 11th step buddies, men or women or that sort of thing, are really important to have and do that. And so we've got a pretty tight group, and that works real well for us. Were we kind and loving? Were we kind and loving? I'm pretty good about that. What we got here going on this particular city of Indianapolis is they've decided they had to redo all of the interstate highways that go through in town, which means the whole entire city is a mess. What used to be a 20-minute ride is now about an hour and 15 minutes. And so I get my chances to see just how content I can be with all of that and coming home and going to work. So it's been kind of crazy. So I'm not kind and loving at all when I'm driving like that. And I see some grins coming up there. Apparently we all kind of do those things. It's not like it used to be. What could I have done better? And was I thinking of myself most of the time? And the answer to that is probably. That's kind of what we do. We had Father's Day here Sunday. And our 3 grown daughters all showed up. And that's kind of something I like to share right now. Starting with the youngest one. The youngest one is 55 years old and has 5 years of sobriety in Alcoholics Anonymous. And it's a welcome change to see. And Tom's met all 3 of the girls, so he can tell you about them. But she'll come, and so that the stuff can hit the fan there and that. So we don't do that. I'm not sure. I'm showing me I have another bad connection. And so that kind of goes on. Our middle daughter and the oldest girls, effectively all 3 of them grew up around AA meetings. I was 24 years when I went in that house, and 25 when I got out, and I've been sober since. That was December 3rd, 1964. And so they kind of grew up with coming to meetings and meeting all our friends and doing that. So they've been a part of AA without being alcoholics, but now we have one. And looking at these, I'm trying to see the last list I made where I went down them with that. Was I selfish, dishonest, afraid? Do I owe an apology? And most nights I can say no to all of those. But it's only been through those things. With that, I don't know how the hell I can talk much more than that, just staying on those subjects. I'll try to do that and get you a little more of my story. I got sober in Laramie, Wyoming, and I actually got sober in a nut house in a little town called Evanston, Wyoming. And I had no idea back then of what all that was going to be about. And I didn't have any idea I was going to be exposed to Alcoholics Anonymous when that started with that, but it was. So I found out quickly I was an alcoholic. I didn't doubt that, I don't think. I can tell you how that happened. It's like I was no longer living at home. And I called the house when I was no longer living at home and hoping to get back into the house because my wife was thoroughly upset with me. And I answered the phone and she said, "Sure, come on over. You can see the kids." And so when I got there, her dad was there. And I'm surprised I got out of the car and walked into the house because I knew that conversation was coming up. And I suspect that any number of alcoholics in the screen have been in that same situation. When you get up there and you have that talk, and that talk is never comfortable, but some of the times things can come from it. But I was afraid then, and that was the start of things that happened. Real quickly, I agreed to go to the Wyoming State Hospital for treatment for alcoholism. And it's only 400 miles from Cheyenne, and I didn't think that was a big deal to ask my father-in-law to take me there, but he decided he was going to put me on the bus with that. And so I got on the bus, I got there, and that started my recovery in AA. I was there for 16 weeks. I found AA there. And I understood that if I had a chance to live at all, I was going to be staying in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I don't know why I believed that right off the top, but I did. And I worked there. So I think what I'm trying to get to here is I had never, my first 4 years of sobriety, I hadn't even looked at a big book. And because there was no sponsorship around it at that point where I wasn't to do that. And I had got to Denver and I got around the big hitters and the people that talked about the big book. And I was really, really cold. I didn't know what they were talking about till much later on. So now I look at these constructively looking at my behavior for the day is a long shot from what I knew about an AA my first few years in AA. That I could do that. Anyway, was I kind and loving toward all? Probably not. What could I have done better? Was I thinking myself most of the time, or was I thinking what I could do for others? Looking at this, but we must be careful not to drift into worry, remorse, or morbid reflection, so that would diminish our usefulness to others. And after making our review, we ask God's forgiveness and inquire what corrective measures should be taken. What I've written under that is go to sleep. And I found that helpful. And that wasn't my idea. It was Tom's first sponsor. And we would talk about this and go through this. And I wish I could honestly tell you I do this every night. I haven't done it every night for a long time with that. Largely because I fall asleep on the couch before it's time to go to bed. And just being old just doesn't work out that well. I don't know that I have ever given that paragraph that much more thought in such a long time. I do remember it was being so much more complete when my wife and I would have that list and have space on each list, and we would talk together how we did on each one of those items. And I suggest that wholly. I wish I was still doing it now. I'd have something fresh to talk about. But I really don't know what else to say about that and keep it to this subject. Were we thinking of what we could do for others, of what we could pack into the stream of life? But we must be careful not to drift to worry, remorse, or morbid reflection that would diminish our usefulness to others. Well, I haven't done that for a long time. I really don't have anything to share about that, and I wish I did. Anybody there got a suggestion or questions that can give me some kind of clue? Tom?
Gary, you're doing fantastic with it. If you like to talk about anything else that pops in your head, go ahead. Otherwise, we can just start the Q&A right now. It's up to you.
Okay. Thank you. I think I find myself today, here's a little stuff I've been looking at and briefly trying to inventory a little bit. I found myself today being the oldest rat in the barn at any AA meeting I go to. And it's a substantial margin in most cases. I attended a meeting here in AA this morning where one of the members got a 30-year token. And a great old boy spent most of his early drinking on the skids in Los Angeles, and is just fortunate to be alive. His body is all beat to hell, but he keeps being sober in that. He's got 30 years sobriety with that, and so. But other than that, that was it. I find myself happening very often. Now I can go to my home group. It's called the Digs here in Indianapolis. It used to be called a Dignitary Sympathy Group. And the reason we call it that, because there weren't any dignitaries there, and there sure as hell wasn't any sympathy. And so that was pretty much what it was about. We were a big book group and a step group then, and still are. And I think as a group now, we're probably together, 37 years, I believe, that we started that. And we've started out a men's group. And that just was. And we got to be a big men's group. And while that was going on, I was bragging on this group to Tom's old sponsor, Don T. And he said, I can't go to your meeting, Garrett. And I didn't think about that for a minute. Ours is a men's stag group. He said, I can't go to that meeting, Garrett. And so I guess I finally got it when he said that. And what he was saying, an AA group, any alcoholic ought to be able to attend it. And effectively, us being a men's stag meeting, that meant half the alcoholics out there couldn't attend our AA group. And so we started a group conscience that one of the guys in that group named Robbie chaired the meeting, and they talked about making it a co-ed group. And we had really a beef for that. The men really didn't. All the men really loved that meeting. I mean, we really did. We had some camaraderie we hadn't seen in AA anywhere else. But a guy named Jim, he's the one that spoke up the most about it. He says, we can't call ourselves an AA group unless any alcoholic can attend it. And so we held a election on that. And that was probably the most angry all of us there had been. But we did go co-ed, and we probably lost maybe a third of the men that attended it. On the first day after we had that vote, the first meeting after we'd had that vote, 3 of the ladies AA ladies showed up at our meeting at that point, and they were bringing flowers and cookies. And to celebrate having that meeting there. And they were the first girls there, and the flowers and cookies. And I ate the cookies, and somebody took the flowers home. I don't know, to somebody else, but that was it. And that's how we started out, and it's been that way since. My first experiences with the 12 steps, I was over 4 years old when sober in AA when I started that. And really didn't know what I was doing. I got caught up in a meeting where some of the guys and gals decided to have it, and we were going to go through the book and the steps. And ended up meeting in this one person's house out in the country. And it's interesting. read through the book, and we got into the third step, and we read/prayed the third step prayer. I'll tell you about that. By that point, we started out as a co-ed group, and we were down to 14 men. And one of the men says, I think we all ought to start, hold hands and read/pray that third step prayer. Because pretty good bet that most of us did not have that memorized at that time. I'm sure we didn't. And because the reason he wanted to do that is every time somebody asked him, there's this one guy, a friend of ours, if he'd started to write an inventory yet, and he says, no, I haven't taken the third step yet. And so he wanted to take care of that. He wanted to be able to tell them the truth, and he wanted to start being able to write inventory. And so that night he told us that. And so we all stood up and held hands and read/prayed the third step prayer together. Now, I think that's important in my book because two things are there. Up until that point, I didn't want anybody ever to see me praying. And probably at that point, that's the only time I was comfortable holding a boy's hand as we were praying. So that was really pretty much new to me. And so we did that. And for what that's worth, there were 14 of us who said that prayer. And shortly after that, one of the 14 men the first thing you need to know is the 13 of us that did get through that and all that, many of us are still alive, and not many, but a few were still alive, and have been sober since that time. They haven't died first with that. But the one we lost was a one-legged Irishman he would go out and drink, and he would lose his wooden leg. And so when he would come back to AA, he'd get 3 or 4 of us to go back down to Skid Row and help him find that damn leg. And that was always part of the deal. But this time, Eddie went out and I guess he froze to death in a doorway in downtown on Skid Row here. And so we didn't have to go look for that leg again. And that's what happened to him after we did that. Other than that, the rest of us have either died sober or are still sober and helping others. With that, I don't know where you could go to find that kind of experience again with a few of us not had to get that to work. In 1977, a friend of mine in AA called me and wanted to offer me a job if I'd moved to Indianapolis, Indiana. And I should have been listening more careful to that, because when I met that guy in AA in Denver, some of the older guys, he was a guy that he spoke very fluently, was very convincing on anything he said, whether he was lying or not, but he could convince you in it. And the other AA members would call him countless vain attempts. And we talk about that, the countless vain attempts of trying to get going. And so that's the guy I agreed to move across country and go to work for, was countless vain attempts in AA. But it's worked out well for us. We found a wonderful home here. I've been a part of a wonderful group of AA members here in the city, and it's worked out well. I think my life today is one where I'm still delighted to be a member of AA. I'm really delighted to see. The Zoom meetings have been great because I get to see friends that I don't get to see, even just going to the local meeting. We just reopened our group from the COVID in person last week. And that was really wonderful just to be able to see each other and do that with that. I'll take questions now. I'm out of ideas, kids.
Beautiful. I have to say something. Gary, thank you That was one of the best. I'm telling you, I just have to say something here, you guys. Excuse me, everybody. Teresa Alcoholic, Gary, I have to say something. I felt like I was also listening to like Bill W. You know, like when we hear the recordings of Bill. So I felt like I was hearing Bill through you. I just felt the spirit of Bill. I have to share that. And the simplicity. And I got sober at 24 going on 25. So I hope to grow up to be just like you. And you got sober the year I was born in 1965.
Oh, come on.
And the simplicity, I just have to tell you, I want to thank you. That's why I love you, old timers. It's not that deep, man. You were just like, I don't know what else I need to say. Just do what it says in there. I dug it, though. I just have to say that. That was priceless. That was just perfect. So thank you. And now I'm looking forward to you guys asking some questions. There's a plethora of information stored. The older I find, the more old timers, you guys, they talk less. So don't worry about it. That doesn't mean you don't know nothing. They have to reserve their energy. So please raise your hands. Keep your comments brief. Ask him some questions because I know he's sitting on a lot of info. And Ali's going to give us how we're going to do that. Come on, Ali.
All right. I haven't stopped recording. It's going to record continuously. Gary, thank you so much. I got to say I'm with Teresa. I was smiling out and in the whole time just because the wealth of information and experience that you bring into this. If I did my math right, 57 years sober. That's incredible. For those of you who may not know, I don't usually do this, but you all know Chris R. and Peter M. and all those amazing spirits.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah, we can hear you. Who was sponsored by Mark Houston, who passed away. Gary was, and Mark Houston was sponsored by Don Pritz, and Gary was, he sponsored Don Pritz, and he's one of the originators of the Fellowship of the Spirit in Colorado, if I'm not mistaken. So there's a wealth of experience here. So please ask him about anything in AA. It doesn't have to be this topic at all. All right. How you put your hands up is click on the reactions button electronically. And you'll see a hands up button. And if you are on your iPhone or your iPad, there's 3 dots to the right of the participants icon. Click on that. And if you guys don't have questions, I got so many written down. But Tom, you was waving his hand, and I caught him. So I'm going to bring Tom first.
Need to unmute yourself.
Thanks, Gary. I appreciate it. And what I would like to, because it's an 11-step meeting, what I'd like to hear is more of your experience with prayer and meditation and what you learned from Paul Martin and some of the books that have influenced you, all that good stuff.
Well, telling my story a little bit like that, I found myself in real trouble in AA when I had about 20-some years of experience, sobriety. We had moved to Indianapolis, and I was Indianapolis at that time, in 1977, might have had 50 AA groups meetings, but they were all speaker meetings, and very seldom were there any discussion meetings. And so, and if they found a new guy came to town, they'd try to collar him to come to each one of those meetings and talk. And so I talked with them, and I told my experience in AA, and that was pretty much part of it. And I found myself getting popular in AA, and that meant I started behaving badly with a lot of the wrong people in AA, and I knew I was in trouble because I was being dishonest and I wasn't handling the checkbook and things. So I called a man named Paul Martin in the Chicago area, and because I'd met him before, and I don't know really, I called him because I was pretty sure he was going to shoot it to me straight. And so I called him, and what I said is, Paul, I said, is there any possibility that a 40-some-year-old grandfather with maybe 21 or 2 years of sobriety could be going through male menopause? and he stopped, and he said, well, Gary, I think if you'll sit down and go through the steps again, write a whole new inventory, and bring it up here to Chicago and take some fifth steps. He didn't say a fifth step. He said some fifth steps. And so I did. I wrote that. I wrote my inventory in a week or so. And I called him, and he wanted me to show up at a motel in Chicago, in LaGrange, and had to be there by 4. And there was a guy standing there in front of him. He said he had an Irish name. His first name was Dennis. He had 29 years of sobriety. And he says, I'm here to swap fifth steps with you. I'll go first so you'll know what to do. And so he walks in and comes in the room, sits down in the only chair in the room. And so he starts reading inventory to him. And he had been like he'd been around long enough. He'd written lots of inventories. He could get through the inventory without writing down all the drama. You can set the drama aside. You learn how to get honest after a while. So anyway, I listened to him, and then he listened to me. Didn't really take us long, but then we compared notes on what I had found that he'd missed, and vice versa. And then he left, a great friend. I learned a lot from him. But I had gotten there on a Friday night, and by, I think it was about 9 o'clock on Sunday morning, I had that same kind of acquaintance with 8 other guys. I did 9 swapping the fifth steps at that time. And I met some of them for breakfast up there. At that point, it was such a relief. I thought, well, gee, I guess that's it. I guess I'm going to go have lunch with them or breakfast with them, and then I'm going home. So I went up there and we ate breakfast, and one of them, it might have been Paul, said, get your pad and pencil out, Gary. We're going to help you with your amends list. And they had remarkable memories. And, boy, they just remembered all that stuff. It came out of it. And what they found out, interesting, what they said. That was my first event that I had been so bad. I'd stopped everything. I had taken any means I could to gather money with that. And I was really in trouble financially. And they couldn't believe that I had stayed sober and really not made any amends in life. And I hadn't done any of that. They couldn't believe it. And so anyway, that was my instructions. They had great memories. They forgot who I had. They didn't forget. They reminded me of the people I talked about that had happened in my story and how many I owed money and what I'd done. And it was everything from companies to in-laws, my parents, anybody you could borrow, AA members, and through that whole thing. They had remarkable memories. And so anyway, I was sent home to make those amends. And they really couldn't believe that I had stayed sober without having done that. And now that I've done that, I understand why that was their belief. If you're walking around remembering that you got all these people out there in your life that you burned, it's uncomfortable. And that's what it is. So anyway, I went home and I sat down with Julie and I explained to her and I showed her the inventory plus with their notes that I'd written down and added on with my wife, and we went over that together. And she says, well, those are our amends. I was with you when you did most of those. When we went to the finance companies or borrowed it from somebody, it didn't matter who it was. She said, I was right beside you when we did that. She said, those are our amends that we owe. And so that was the way we took it and added. So I started the process that every time I had a payday, I was working straight commission, so every time I had some kind of money, windfall fall in and all that, we'd go upstairs and we would figure out how to pay it and string it out and do it. And I always seemed to run out of money before I ran out of bills. And, I mean, it's just part of it. And one night, I went down downstairs and I said, Julie, I don't see any way I can possibly make enough money to pay off these amends. That's such much money. I said, any way we could do it. And I was really hoping for some sympathy, but that's not what I got. That was it. Next morning, I go downstairs, get ready to go to work. And Julie says she had this idea. Okay, the idea was we could sell out the house, cash in all my retirement, and pay off all those amends, and maybe we would have enough money to buy a used mobile home or something like that to live into. And it took a while to do that, but that's what we did. We did that, and then I got on I got my list out, and I had it out again, and I started calling people to make sure we agreed on what I owed them and that. And it was her parents, and it was any number of other people. One of them was an AA member. Most of you would know. He lives in St. Paul, Minnesota. And he spends summers in Mexico. But and we called him, and I remember I called him one day, and I said, "What's your address?" And he said, "Why?" And I just said, "Well, I got the money to repay what you gave us all those years ago." And he laughed, and I said, "Well, what's so damn funny?" He says, "You need to understand something. Back then, I was in a business that was very, very profitable in the real estate business, and effectively buying and selling apartment houses around the country. And that he was doing really well in it. But then Congress changed the laws about depreciation and things like that made it really do. And so that meant he owed a lot more money than he had coming in. And he had investors that were looking for their money. And so he was looking for money. And he just laughed. He explained that. He said, "I don't tell anybody that in AA. But back then, when we helped you, my wife and I had made a deal where if we see somebody, we were making so much money, well, if we see somebody we can help, we make a group conscience and try to help them out." And so when I had stopped, he actually had just stopped here in Indianapolis. He was flying somewhere to talk, so we're driving back we stop at the airport a minute and talk. And I'm in real trouble because they're going to foreclose on our house the following Monday. If I remember right, that was a Thursday. And so I told him, I said, "We're going to lose the house, and Julie doesn't know about it. It's going to kill her." And he didn't say anything, and we were driving from the airport out to where we lived on the other side of town. And he says, "Where's your bank?" And I said, "What bank?" He says, "The one that has a note on your house." And I said, "Well, it's downtown." And he says, let's stop by and see. Maybe they'll talk." And I said, "Bob, they're really tired of talk. I guarantee if I'm there, they're not going to want to talk." And so you never know. You never know. And so I remember we pulled up, found a parking place across the street, and we're walking in the door to go into that bank. And I was remembering those days I was walking into the principal's office with my dad, because that's what it felt like. And so we went in there, and the banker, he comes into this room we're at. Bob's sitting right up at the desk, and I'm sitting back from the room. I really was uncomfortable there. And when the conversation was over, we were caught up on our payments. It came out of Bob had the means in his pocket and all that. to pay back a lot of money, and that was it. And we're walking out to the car, and I'm just numb. I said, "Damn, Bob, I got to pay that back." And he said, "That's your problem." And I still think that's the smartest thing he ever said. And that was part of it. And so I told Julie after Bob had taken Bob back to the airport and he went on to wherever he was going, what had happened there. He said that way he wasn't quite so embarrassed about it. But then what happened after that, we had to pay him back and a bunch of the other people that we owed money that hadn't showed up there. And so we did. We sold the house, got enough out of the house that I paid them all back that we had. Paid Bob back, and he laughed. And I'm not going to tell this story on that. And paid our folks back. I remember calling my mother-in-law. Well, I started this amends process, and I had advice from Paul Martin that I had to talk about more than just the money. And so we started with Julie's parents. Her dad answered the phones, and I thanked him because I don't remember. I know he was so upset with me he couldn't talk, but he never was that anxious about it. And I called him and I thanked him for his behavior around me. And I said, "No, I know it worried you to death on how I was treating your daughter or your grandchildren." At that point, we'd had 3 little girls. And I wanted to say more right there, but I made a mistake and told him I loved him. And he said, "Oh shit," and he handed the phone to Grandma. And so she gets on the phone, and I said, "Have you any idea how much money you've given us over the years, girl?" And she said, "Right down to the last penny." And so that was it. We sent her the money, and that helped a little bit. She was never happy even with me when Julie and I were dating in high school. We've been married for 62 years, I think, but we've been together quite a bit longer now. And she said, "Right down to the last penny." Well, I sent her the money. Kind of telling that story. And when she would write a letter to our house, she would always write it to Julie. And it'd all be "Dear Julie," and then not Julie and Gary, or that sort of thing. Later on, after we paid the money back and done some more things for them and that sort of thing, letters would come out here, and it would say, "Dear Julie and Gary," and that was in addition to all her addresses. And so money does talk, just in case you didn't know about him. So we lived in a mobile home for a few years. It didn't take long. Being honest about your money and working, giving the guy a day's work, doing what things did, it wasn't long we were able to buy another house in another part of town. And I'm sitting here in the second house since that day, but was pretty much it. I think with all this we've talked about and done, and my wife and I, we get along fine. We're delighted with our children, our grandchildren, and I think we're just pretty well lucked out. We haven't been. Let me back up a little. Our life has changed so much. Julie has Parkinson's disease, and it's progressive, and she suffers more and more with it, and she goes through periods of extreme exhaustion, which apparently is one of the bigger symptoms of Parkinson's, because what happens, you got muscles moving all the time, and it wears you out. I'm seeing a lady here nodding about that, so and with that. And so I find myself trying to be more useful around the house when I'm here, and get to thinking I'm really somebody, because here I am, the primary dishwasher and bottle washer and stuff, and I'm getting real good with the vacuum cleaner, and that's part of it, and that's just part of our deal. I think that's one thing that I keep thinking about with that. With all our time together, it's been great. We've had the experience of hanging with a lot of wonderful AA members around, and Tom and Juanita are certainly part of them. And Tim Miller's had pictures of Bob O sitting up there, and his thing there, and it's so. These are people you learn on, not only on a first name basis, but you get to meet most people at pretty much a gut level. And it can be very, very pleasant. It can be a little touchy at times, but it's part of life. So I thank God for it with that. And I appreciate you putting up with me at these Zoom talks. I've actually got an in-person talk in 2 days at a meeting here in town, and haven't been doing those for a long time, have we? And I'm kind of looking forward to it. Some of them are old people here in the city that we've known well over the years, and in most cases, they're eating meetings here in this part. This is down home country here. You go out in these country places, and they always got fried chicken and baked beans and all that stuff that you're lucky to get home in time. But looking for this on Thursday. So anyway, Ali, thanks for calling me. It's been fun. And
Gary, we're not finished. Can you hang out a little bit more, or do you have to go?
No,
because
I'm okay for a while.
Oh, you're okay. Okay, you're an absolute treasure, and this recording is going to be incredible for me. We have Susan and Patty just patiently. They've been waiting. Susan, come on up, please.
All right. Can you hear me?
Yep.
I don't share at this meeting. I come here every week, and I never share, but. You know, like when he started talking about the legless guy, I had a legless story, and I was going to pitch in and help. But Gary, like Ollie was saying, you are a true treasure. I have been cracking up. I'm going through all kinds of emotions over here. First story was when I first got sober years ago. Every time I opened my mouth and shared, they'd say, I once heard a man complain he had no shoes until he sat next to the man with no feet. And it never failed. Every time I shared, they, talked about this guy with, no feet. And it was a beginner's meeting, and I was afraid to talk in meetings. So I would wait till this Wednesday meeting, and it was up on a stage. Well, one Wednesday night, of course, I was sharing, and I was going to hear about this legless guy, and they pushed in Gordon on the wheelchair and carried the wheelchair up onto the stage, and lo and behold, he had no feet. He had no legs, period. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's the guy they're talking about. So it took that much. God is so good that he gave me that to know what gratitude meant. And in Ocean County, New Jersey, there's we used to call him Legless John, and he never got along with this other guy. And they were always going back and forth on one another. Tuesday step meeting, it was an afternoon step meeting. They got into a physical altercation, and Legless John took off his leg and started beating the other guy with it. and it's like legend around here, So I didn't know how Gary, I was like, maybe Gary needs a little help. Gary didn't need my help making fun of, making a jerk out of myself over here. Gary, you did a wonderful job, and I'm just so grateful that I logged on tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, kiddo. That was fun.
Thank you, Susan. Next is Patty W. Let's also make use of Gary here and ask him some questions if you have. Please go ahead.
Ali, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes, can.
Great. Look, honest to God, I got to say, that man, what a man. Imagine the years of sobriety he's got. Oh, Jesus, Gary, you're absolutely amazing. Despite the fact that your internet needs a bit of adjusting. But I tell you, when you mention about those two Irishmen that you come across, what is it about we Irish? We always seem to feature in any story about Alcoholics Anonymous. I remember when I'd go to meetings in Sydney and they'd say, oh, I'm a member of the CIA, Catholic, Irish and alcoholic. And I used to get so mad. And in my early days, before I worked the steps, I would sometimes say to people, we don't have a monopoly on alcoholism, we Irish. What about all the Russians and the Germans? Anyway, I don't do that anymore, thank God. But I really related to you too, Gary, very much in the sense that Parkinson's runs very strongly in my family, and it's one of my big fears. And what a great man you are, looking after your wife. That's the gift of sobriety. Again, you're there tending to her lovingly, and that is a wonderful gift. But you've put the fear of God in me, Gary, though. My question to you is that I have started making my financial amends. And I have done that via a direct debit that I am donating to 2 different charities. But now I'm feeling I need to be doing more after you telling me that you sold the house from under yourself too. Because I actually don't know how much I owe this company that I was getting. I was getting workers' compensation when I should have been back at work. And I don't. So what do I do, Gary? Do I have to up my payments, or I'm not suffering from selective memory. I actually don't know how much money I owe this insurance company. So what would you suggest? Thank you.
I would suggest kind of keep doing what you're doing. I shouldn't say this, but if insurance companies find out you owe them money, they're going to come after you. They are just horrible about that. And they'll do that. You may even want to find legal help to get that taken care of. We've done that here with people that somehow have burned an insurance company and are wanting to make that back. And with that, so don't be too quick to open up with them. Been our experience with that maybe the way you're doing it right now is just enough to keep them away. But be careful with it.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry, Gary. Yeah, there's no way that they have any concept, because I was getting paid when I was, I should have been back at work. So it's just that in my conscience, I know that I should have been back at work.
Okay.
And I wasn't. But I am contributing, as I said. That's not me saying, oh, well, look, I'm doing this, so I need to get out of jail card. But I'm given to 2 charities. But I just, at the end of the day, I just think, well, should I sell my house? And yeah, anyway. Sorry, Gary, that's it.
Well, worked okay for us, but no guarantees.
Thank you, Carmel. Patty, I'm going to try you one more time, Patty. Patty going once, twice.
Okay, now you can hear me?
Oh, yes.
Hi, Allie. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Allie and Teresa and everybody for these great meetings. My sobriety date is 11/24 of 18. Gary, thank you for your share. I was interested in when you were talking about the questions and writing it down and discussing at night with your wife. I like that idea. My question is, what prayers did you and your wife say at night as you were doing your work at night? Did you say any prayers at night?
Well, on occasion, none of those were canned prayers and all that. It was mostly just praying what was on our heart. Very often, when we'll be praying on something like that, we'll have friends in AA or a grandchild that's sick or something like that. And so our prayers will go on that and asking for health and healing for any of those that have been hurt. And a lot of those can be AA members. Even though we're sober, doesn't mean we don't get hurt. So
thank you, Pat.
Yeah.
We got James. Come on up, please. James B.
Yes. Wow, Gary, that was truly, truly tremendous. You are such a jewel. I'm just echoing what Teresa said. The simplicity, you know, you said, that's all I got, you kiddies, you know, and I was like, he's right. So thank you for everything. I don't have a question for you. I just felt remiss if I didn't say that. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dallas. That's great. Thank you. I'll remember that.
Thank you, James. Valerie, come on up, please.
Hi, everybody. My name is Valerie, and I'm an alcoholic. And Gary, thank you so much. I'm trying to imagine, like your friends, how God kept you sober those first 4 years. But I'm so grateful that happened and that you shared your experience here tonight. I just have a quick question. What do you read and what do you meditate on in the morning?
In the mornings, let me back up. I'm liable to read most anything. There's a book I'm reading right now, and I can't think of the top, but it's a story of it takes place in many years ago in Russia, and it's the Way of the Pilgrim is what it's called, and it's a story of this pilgrim who is got a bad leg, and he's just walking all over Russia and showing up at monasteries for a free meal and things like, you know, that goes on in lots of places. And he keeps hearing that he should pray without asking anything for it, anything to want it. and to pray ceaselessly, to never stop praying. And so he reads that in the Bible, and at one time I could tell you what the chapters and verses were, but I no longer remember. And so they taught him a prayer that never ends, ceaseless prayer. And now the book, he gives up what the ceaseless prayer should be with that, but then it goes through with all this pilgrim's adventures as he's going from place to place and getting odd jobs and things like that. and he's always so happy, you know, because he's got this ceaseless prayer. And the prayer.
Can you repeat that again, Gary? The ceaseless prayer, what? You cut up for a second. Okay.
Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me. Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me. Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me. And that's it. That becomes a part of his. And he does it so much, it's kind of built into him with that. I've read, this is maybe the third time I've read this particular book. The Way of the Pilgrim is what it's called. And all I can tell you, it was written in Russia. They don't know by whom, everything else. And you can find it, and it's translated. The Russian is translated in several of them, and you can find it on any place you want to there. But there's more than one book of that, and so it's kind of fun to read that and that, because he runs into believers who have found a way of life and knows it, and they're sharing those with him, and he shares it with us. So this time I'm reading it. Well, what happened the first time I read that? is, Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me. I adopted it, and it's a part of me. And it comes up on occasion when I'm not asking for it. It volunteers, if you will. And very often, I walk with my dog every morning and every evening and all that. And it's so easy for that little prayer to mix in with my cadence as I'm walking. And it kind of be a part of it. And I've done that for so many, many years. And I do other praying too and that sort of thing. But that's the one that's been dominant for a long, long time.
Thank you, Valerie, for your question. Thank you, Gary. It looks like our last question. Jimmy R., come on up, please, brother.
Hey, Gary. Thank you for your talk this evening. I'm part of that lineage. Don sponsored somebody in Hilton Head that sponsored somebody that sponsored me. And so I've been shoved into this Mark Houston and all this stuff. So that is my lineage. I'm part of that. I'm very excited to hear you. My question was, you talked about the 11th step, when we retire at night, as the evening review, and there's a lot of confusion when I talk about it to other people that I think the 12 and 12 got this confusion where they call it the 10th step inventory at night, and the big book has the 11th step as the inventory at night. Do you have any sorting out, any opinion on that, or any sort of thoughts on that?
Well, I'm very opinionated on that, and I never read the 12 and 12. Since I can remember, my times in the 12 and 12 were short-lived, and I don't know how to tell you that. It just never really rang with me. It's not that I'm anti-12 and 12. I got some wonderful friends in the 12 and 12 AA group here in town and that, but it's not anything that I use hardly at all.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you so much. If I have one small question in a few minutes that we have left. I was just wondering if you could just tell us a little bit about your relationship with Don.
Oh, sure. That was interesting. I can tell you that he showed up effectively the day he got out of prison, and he was met on the front porch steps of the York Street Club in Denver. It's a big, well-known club in town. A lot of people call it the Mother House, but and he showed up there, and an older man named Reed Edgar was there to greet him. And Reed had met Don in prison and told him, and they were talking about him getting out. And his words to Don, Reed told him, was, well, if you come to the York Street Club when you get out, you'll probably stay out. And Don believed him. And of course, that's what happened. Don had probably one of the finest minds I have ever seen. He came from a family where his brothers and sisters and all that had very high scores on the Mensa testing. I don't know that he was ever tested, but he sure had the ability, I think, and that. But my job with him was help him to get along on the streets. He would have these part-time jobs, and I'd have some of them with him. They pay for your day's work. And if they gave him a check, his mind would not accept a check as money. Money he could have. If you gave him cash, he could do it. And so part of my thing was how to get along legally on the street, doing things most everything else the rest of us do in a business-like manner, if you will, and that. So I took him to a bank, and we got him a checking account and things like that. That's what we were going on. And later on, as we got to know each other more, he learned that I was from Wyoming, and we were in Denver, in Colorado. And he's starting on his amends. He was finding odd jobs that were getting good money, and he was wanting to start making amends. And so one of our first trips together with that, and I kind of hate to call it a sponsorship, he did, but I drove him 100 miles up to Cheyenne, and I took him to Andy Rodell's drugstore up there, and I walked him in there, and that was an old family drugstore in Cheyenne, and look, Julie and I were familiar with them, and it wasn't unusual, and took him in there and introduced him to Andy, and he made an amend. He ripped them off. I'm sure drugs were involved and other things too, but he walked in there and he made that amends there. And what I can tell you about that, is Andy had he was not thinking in any way, shape, or word to publish Don for that money. He knew that Don was making an amend, and that was probably more important to Don than the money in that. But very few people were as bright and as quick as he was. Had a fun sense of humor. He called me sponsor, but that's pushing it. He had a problem beyond that. Well, I'll tell you one thing we did. How much time we got? Just a minute?
We got about 7 minutes or so.
Okay. We were having a quarterly service convention in southwest Colorado, and I was going down to it. I was a GSR or something, and I thought that'd be something to show him. So we take him down there, and it's one of those service meetings. He says, Gary, he says, I don't think I ever want to do that again. And I thought, well, you don't have to. Now you got to flash forward for a few years. I'd moved to Indiana. He and I still on the phone a lot and that sort of thing. And I found out, he tells me that he's the chairman of the state committee. You know, around here you have area committees. Colorado's only one area. So and he was a service chairman for that and was doing that. And that's what I think, So he went from thinking he never wanted to do that again to becoming a trustee at large and got to take Russia the AA message. And so that was neat. I had no idea I was doing that much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Gary. That was awesome. Teresa, come on up, please.